Well, welcome everyone. It's a pleasure for me to introduce Stephen Gouveia from the University of Porto. He's the author of this book. He gave it to us, to our library, The Age of Artificial Intelligence, and he's working on the ethic of AI. And I asked him to talk about the brain-machine interfaces because I was interested in that. So thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you. So I will just have the PowerPoint here, always, not there. So the PowerPoint will be here? Yes. Okay, because I will have to check mine from time to time. Okay. So thank you very much for having me. So this is the last stop of like a mini tour that I did from South America. So first I was in Rio, then I visited Santiago of Chile, and now I finished my tour in Uruguay. I'm very happy to finish, and it's very, so I went to a quick long day yesterday, and like to grab the feeling of the city, and it looks very much like Europe in a lot of the places around the city. So it's a nice thing to finish my tour here. And today I will talk mostly on the project that I'm leading now, which is a sincere project on the ethics of AI in medicine. This is a very cute logo that I did. And I will also talk in the second half of the talk about brain-machine interfaces, which is a very interesting technology, and AI is very interested. And I think there is a lot of discussion to be made about that topic as well. So first of all, I would like to start with a very happy and positive story about AI in medicine, which is a very specific case where a Japanese woman had a very rare disease that doctors could not find what it was. And in a moment of almost desperation, they run their genetic data into a very sophisticated AI model. And basically the AI model, after 10 minutes, discovered that she had a very specific case of leukemia. So this is a very interesting, positive way of using AI in medicine, right? Which can help us to find information that we cannot do it otherwise. The thing is that this lady was dealing with this disease for years, and doctors were always trying to diagnose her, and they were not successful. And with just 10 minutes of running her data, basically they found what she had, and of course they could be able to treat her symptoms and make her life a bit easier. But there are also a second story that is what I call a negative story about AI in medicine, which is basically this idea that a lot of models create a sort of racist bias, right? And a lot of people debate about what does that mean? Does that mean that this technology is evil and we should just ban them? Maybe, I don't think the problem is in the technology by itself, but in this case, I think it's about the data acquisition, right? So you need also to improve how the data is being acquired and what kind of data you are feeding the system in order to make it more efficient. Of course, there is here a very big problem because this model usually contains mostly data from white people. Why? Because white people have more access to health in general. So it's a big debate about how we can make these models more ethical, and this is what we will talk about today. But my main point here is just to tell you that there is a good story. There are good stories about AI in medicine, but there are also bad stories about AI in medicine. What is then the problem when we think about an AI medicine? So we know that this kind of technology is being developed, and this is debatable, but at least some people argue that there is this assumption that AI medicine is more accurate, it's more reliable, it's more efficient. That, of course, when we say this comparison, when we do this comparison, we are always referring to what we call a human way of doing medicine or traditional medicine, right? So these AI models, they are more reliable than human doctors in general. And of course, because they are more reliable, more efficient, they can also be more economical because they can do faster diagnosis 24 hours per day. And this is our advantages compared with traditional medicine. And I think we can say it's a factual truth, so it's not a philosophical thing to be debated, that these models can create or can increase efficiency and reliability of many different medical processes. Some of them, these are just a few examples, so you can use learning networks in diagnostic imaging, and this will help doctors to analyze different kinds of cancer. You can also use AI to elaborate specific treatments. You can also use AI to perform robotic mediated surgeries. And of course, you can also use it to make preliminary diagnosis. One interesting thing here is that all this is AI medicine, but they are very different by nature, right? So I think this is something that my project will try to do, which is what I call a taxonomy of AI medicine. So, because as you will see, I think at least some technologies raise or create a thing called a trust gap in medicine. But it's interesting to think about which of these models or these technologies actually create a trust gap, because I don't think all of them create such a thing. So it is very important to understand that all these, or at least some, again, to be more accurate, some of these technologies have this, what we call a black box structure. And this is very different from the usual black box term, right? So in airplanes, we usually have black boxes that contain the information and you can have access to that information, right? But here, black box means exactly the opposite. So it's a structural feature of a system. And it points out to this idea that we cannot have access, epistemic access to it, right? So we can understand from a human point of view the kind of input or information that we feed that system, but we don't understand how it crosses all this information, and we will also be able to understand the outputs of that system. So this makes the entire medical practice epistemically opaque and an obscure process. And I think this is a feature that creates what I call a trust gap. And why trust is important in medicine? Because the idea of using all these technologies is actually to influence directly the decision-making of the doctor, right? Or the health professional in general. But the thing is, if the doctor doesn't understand what happens inside that system, then I think like a trust gap is created, and the epistemic nature between doctors and patients, but also between doctors and their own medical practice, comes doubtful. And why there is a trust gap in the first place? Because I think because we are dealing with a black box, and usually a black box is a black box because it deals with millions of data, right? Because if it's a simple model that has not a lot of data, we can still get all the information from it. But the problem with this kind of technologies is that in order to be very efficient, they need to use a lot of data. And I think that's why technically the model starts to be a black box. So what I argue is that there is a philosophical vacuum that is created by this, and this philosophical vacuum has a practical impact in how medicine is done. And of course, the trust gap has two specific levels. So the first level is that I think it's one of that people don't consider a lot, which is the level of how a health care professional can trust what he is doing, right? How it affects his own medical practice. So this is the first level. And the second level is, of course, how a patient can trust a healthcare professional, right? Because there is an ethical paradox here. So the doctor has a sort of moral obligation to follow a procedure that he doesn't understand. That's because he knows, at least by principle, that that machine is more efficient than him. But he doesn't know how to explain, how to understand what's happening there. So the trust gap has two levels that I think it's interesting to make a distinction of it. Of course, a lot of the times, more important than a medical decision in medicine, we need, or there is this assumption that the patient or the doctor is in full control and that the patients can trust this doctor because of that, right? So in traditional medicine, we trust our doctors because we believe that they are in full control of what they are doing, right? Of their medical practice. But I think, at least in some AI medicine, that the medical experts will lose part or even the total control of the medical practice, and this will affect directly his decision-making process. And therefore, there is this epistemic gap that arises, and that can impact also how trust can be considered. Some philosophers like Price, they call this kind of AI medicine a blind medicine, which is a very interesting term, I think. Why? Because the doctor has to blindly trust epistemically a system that he doesn't understand, and also the patient will need to trust a doctor that doesn't understand what he's doing. So AI medicine will create this paradox in medicine. So we can potentially increase the efficiency of medicine in many, many ways. And this will also be relevant because, of course, it will save more lives, but it will also save a lot of money, right? Because if you can do fast diagnosis 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, this will make medicine, the cost of medicine low a lot. And this is positive because we can apply all that money to other relevant issues such as poverty, housing, etc. But all these positive impacts arise with the creation of an epistemic gap that influence the way trust is being managed between the two. Of course, this epistemic problem is not just relevant for like trust purpose, but it can also lead to very specific medical errors. So I brought here a very specific case history. So Terra-25 was a computer-controlled radiotherapy machine, and basically during its use, it overdoses more than 6 cancer patients, which is not good, right? And a more recent example is the Da Vinci surgical system that has injured more than 2,000 patients while during the first 10 years of use. So these are the fact that we cannot understand how the system works in specific is also relevant for the medical practice in itself and not just for an ethical reason regarding trust. So the problem that I think AI medicine creates, or at least some specific tools of AI medicine, is problematic in several reasons. So the first thing is regarding the epistemic transparency that prevents the doctors to explain what they are doing. Then also, this will prevent the doctors to understand their own medical decisions about what their own patients. And of course, because we are missing the first two, this lack of epistemic transparency will also collide with principles of trust and autonomy and informed decision, right? So if a doctor cannot explain the totality of what is happening with that patient, the patient cannot be informed and therefore he cannot consent to a specific treatment, for example. So this is the problem. I'm not sure if it was clear enough. I think it was, but I think we can make a first pause and I can ask you if you have any doubt or if you want to add anything. Yeah, go ahead.
So this is already happening, or it's like the prediction or something that will be happening? The usually part, it happens.
That's interesting. So my goal is to provide like a general philosophical like analysis of this. But of course, I need to focus on what is happening right now. But my main goal is not on the present, but on the future. So what kind of ethical standards we can now think to regulate, let's say, the technology that we are developing right now. But there are already models who have this black box structure. Of course, I don't think they are being used like, so there are 3 ways you can relate technology and human interaction, right? So you can think about human and machines like an in-the-loop relationship, an on-the-loop relationship, or an out-of-the-loop relationship. And out-of-the-loop relationship is basically where the technology does all the decisions and doesn't need any supervision. And on-the-loop is the technology does a decision, but there is a human supervisor who can like accept or deny that decision. And a in the loop relationship is where the human is always supervising the technology. I think right now we are dealing with technologies that have an in or on the loop structure. But I think the more interesting case or the most challenging case is the out of the loop, right? Because that's where like the efficiency and the more quick diagnosis will be done. So right now we don't have out of loop technologies yet, but I think the strong philosophical case or challenge is that one specific. So whenever I'm talking about it, I'm talking about that specific case. Yeah, but that's a good point. Yeah. Okay. So this is a problem which we can discuss after if it's a problem or not. But so now I want to try to provide or to think at least 3 solutions to solve this problem. The first solution is just basically to do what we did with other technologies that we didn't understand very well, which is to claim that we should just restrict or stop or ban all these kind of models that have this black box structure. So, because we don't have epistemic access to what technology is doing, and because one of the requirements for having a trust relationship in doctors and patients is missing, then this kind of black box medicine should be just banned because we don't understand enough, and we will not be able to provide an ethical, an ethical background in order to use that kind of technology in our society. Of course, this is, I think, it's what I call the lazy solution, right? Because you are not literally trying to think about the positive and the negatives. Because again, AI medicine can have a lot of problems, but it can also bring a lot of positive ethical features. And I think we need to think about those, right? And then what this solution does is just to say, this is too dangerous and we should just ignore all the positives and just focus on the negative. And I don't think this is the right way to do it, exactly because all these positive obviously outcomes from technology are interesting to be think ethically. And I think my case is that it will be actually immoral to ignore all these ethical positive outcomes. So I don't think this solution works very well. Again, all the money we can save with medicine can be applied to other issues, and this is it's an independent ethical argument for that as well. We have a lot of problems today with education, housing, poverty. So all that money can be used to other ethical goals. And I also think that in practice, I don't think industry will stop producing all this kind of technology because it's literally useful. And I don't think this solution is viable, but we can discuss it if you think it is, right? So this solution was, for example, applied to human genetics, right? And it was very successful. So we thought that the dangers were too strong regarding the positive outcomes. So maybe this is a solution. I don't know. So who agrees with, who thinks that this solution is interesting right now? Raise your hand. No? It's always, yeah.
But for that kind of out of the loop technology, maybe.
Right, okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Because in general, well, I can say that right away. I will present 3 solutions, and maybe different technologies will require an application of the different solutions, right? Mm-hmm. So, because the way I structured my project was, I would think about the best solution to be applied to all technologies, but right now what I'm trying to do, or what I'm getting to, is that different technologies will have different solutions to make it more ethical. So that's a good answer to say that we can, for example, apply this solution just for the out of the technologies, but not to the on or in the But the second solution, which I think is more interesting from a philosophical point of view, from the previous one, is to say that we should accept the benefits of AI black box and just ignore the negative consequences. Why? Because more important than a trust-based expert relationship in medicine, what we usually want from medicine is actually to save more lives and to be more efficient. And we actually know that trust is not the medicine's priority, if you think about it, right? So whenever you go to doctor, the goal of the doctor is not to maximize the kind of trust you can have on him, right? It's actually to maximize the efficiency of the okay, I'm missing the word, the medical efficiency, yeah, efficiency. Why? Well, because like, if you maximize trust, this can be even better for you as a patient, right? If you fully trust your doctor without any distance, your doctor can, for example, prescribe a medication that will hurt you for some personal reason, and because you fully trust him, you will not be able to understand that. So the point here is that trust is not the medicine's priority, but the medicine's priority is to treat the patient. Some authors call this kind of approach an epistemic paternalism, which is an interesting way to phrase it. And of course, this epistemic paternalism will be applied into two levels I told you before, right? So first, it will be applied to the doctor and the way he will be able to trust the medical practice. And also to how the patients can trust the doctor. Of course, even though I think this solution is more interesting than the previous one, there are several problems that I think we can consider regarding this one. So first of all, I think this is an interesting evidence that shows that patient-centered medicine can have better health outcomes in general, so they can lead to lower costs, to fewer rehospitalizations, to great patient satisfaction. So this is an interesting evidence that we should consider. Also, of course, I think there are normative reasons to argue that doctors in general should respect the autonomy of patients, and this sort of imply that the right to be informed about their own medical decisions. And this is again something that is missing if we apply this technology. And finally, I think that a lot of this technology assumes that data, right, from big data, is a concept that is very clear and factual about the world. But we actually know that data are not like that. So they are highly contextual and relational, and the value of data is not defined by itself, but it's you need so it's a relational process. The way a data is defined will depend on how he is inserted in the specific environment. A philosopher in the UK, Sabina, he works on this approach. And basically the point is that this approach makes an assumption about a philosophical assumption about data as a concrete and real facts of the world, but data are not like that, quite on the contrary. And of course, this can lead to the sort of bias problems that I told you before. And of course, you can say that this is not a problem of the technology, but it's a problem of how we are feeding the technology with what kind of data. And this is debatable, but I think some of these reasons are strong enough to at least make us consider another possible solution instead of just accepting this one. But again, I think this solution is more interesting than the previous one, so I'm not sure if you agree with that. And what do you think about this one in specific? So do you think it's more interesting or not?
I think it's equally contentious.
Right. So should I continue? Yeah. Okay. And I think so. I think we can think of a third solution, which is what I call create an explainable or transparent AI. Well, why? Because I really think that the epistemic transparency thing is important for the ethical reasons, but also for the medical epistemic work by itself. So what is explainable AI? it's basically the idea that we should create a sort of second order AI that will be applied to the first order. And the idea is that we will be able to retrieve the relevant information from the first AI. And this will make the entire process transparent again, right? Because if we can use an AI that can retrieve the relevant information, then this will be able to tell us the information that we were missing, and this will make the entire thing ethical again, because we have the relevant information to make informed judgments from the doctor's side, but also from the patient side. Of course, this is there is a big problem with explainable AI in general, right? Basically, the problem is that there is like a sort of negative correlation between performance and transparency, right? So the more a model performs, less transparent it will be, and the more transparent model is way less efficient. And this is basically the biggest challenge, I think, of this solution. I don't think it's a philosophical challenge per se. I think it's actually an empirical or a technical issue that engineers and other scientists should try to look for. But from what and this is a big debate about what, or if explainable AI is a thing, right? So can we actually create an explainable AI in the first place? There's a lot of debate about that. But assuming that we can sort of do that, I think the challenge will be a technical challenge and not like a philosophical one per se. And I think that will be the biggest challenge for this approach. Yeah. So is this more confusing? No?
Gareth, that this second order AI is transparent enough to say to you because it's a loop.
So this is a very simplification of the process, right? But basically, you can, so imagine we have here a black box that is 100% efficient and 0% transparent. The idea is that we create a sort of second order AI where we have 99% of efficiency and we have 1% of transparency. Why? Because all these, there are a lot of data here that are just noise, right? So they are not relevant for the medical practice itself. The idea is to create an AI that can analyze and can detect which data are being used or not. But of course, you cannot stop here. So you have to create this third order AI, and this further AI would be like 98% efficient. And yeah, and then you will reach a point in this spectrum where you will be able to still have the relevant information from the first one, but it's transparent enough in order for us to humanly, comprehend what the first AI was doing. But this is a technical challenge, basically, how we can engineer the models to retrieve the relevant information while we ignore the noisy information. Yeah.
But if you think that all the data that the system takes in order to make the process is more than just a correlate of the output. I mean, maybe there are some correlations about things that are not medically or biologically relevant.
Yeah.
For example, where we live.
Yeah.
And that also correlates with a thing like what you eat or I don't know, whatever cultural, social stuff that maybe is good for having the right output, but it's totally irrelevant from the biological medical point of view.
Yeah.
So the problem is, is that it all depends on what kind of data you put in order to make those systems.
Yeah.
I mean that maybe when you try to discover what data are actually using, they are not the ones that are medically important.
Yeah, and that's a good one. But that challenge it's a challenge that already happens in human medicine, right? So sometimes there are medical issues that are created by like where you live, for example, right? That they are not relevant in the first instance. So a doctor doesn't test the quality of your water, for example, that you are drinking. But after some tests and after you run a bunch of hypotheses that were not like positively confirmed by testing, for example, you start to add this ad hoc hypothesis about the causes of the specific syndrome. And I think the kind of like mental activity that the doctor does when he's doing this can be replicated in this kind of like by like of this kind of data. But of course, it's a challenge again. I'm not saying this is even possible. I'm not sure. Like it's a technical challenge again. And this is why, like, part of my project works with doctors as well in Porto. So what I want to do is to literally ask doctors if they think AI medicine makes them more efficient or more pragmatic about what they are doing. So hopefully the project will bring some answers to those questions, but I'm not sure you can answer all the questions. But at least some of them can be formulated, right? And can be studied. So this is a good starting point to do this. Is there any other? Yes?
Just one last point. Why is
This one?
Why is it that it did not happen?
Oh, it's it's a technical feature of the technology. So the point is, a more efficient technology usually is the one that has more data, but the fact that it has more data, it makes it less transparent to understand from a human point of view. So that it's a technical feature again. So a more efficient system will be less transparent by definition. Or you don't agree with that?
No, I mean, I understand that part, but because there are two things working in parallel. You have the diagnosis made by a super, I don't know anything, but you have the diagnosis and then you have the explanation. The explanation, or is it the same thing? Like,
so you think they are separate? You can separate the diagnosis?
I don't know because I don't know anything about it yet.
No, I think, well, you are talking about a model that does the diagnosis, for example, right? So different models that have different goals, right? So the diagnosis one is interesting because part of what is relevant in the explanation is to understand the diagnosis, right? But I don't think the explanation is just the diagnosis. And this is a good point because I will also be able to, or I need to provide a sort of a theory of explanation in AI, right? And I don't have that right now. But that's also very relevant. What is an explanation in AI? Because I think it's very different from the kind of explanations we usually talk about. And so I will probably need to use some philosophy of science to try to understand this a bit better. But I think that no matter what will be the definition of explanation, I think AI will always be missing some of the parts. Yeah. So first part of the talk is done. So I think, of course, by analyzing all these positive and negative arguments, I think we will be able to at least create some ethical standards and to understand where and in which situations we can use or not use these different kind of technologies. But probably right now, I actually think that different technology will need different solutions for them. And of course, this is a more thing, it's more for doctors usually that I say this, or to computer scientists. But we should try to find what I call a methodological bias between ethics and technology. So instead of creating the technology first, we should first think ethically about its implications, and only then we should fully develop the technology. But we are philosophers, so we all know that. So first part of the talk is done. I'm not sure how many times I have. How am I doing this time? So second, yeah, like 15 minutes. Okay. So the second part is about the ethics of brain-machine interfaces. There are many ways to describe what brain-machine interface is. sometimes it's also called brain-computer interface, but computer is a very specific way of defining a machine. So now I think the more used concept is machine because it's a broader concept. This is what? This is like 2010, I think, Rio de Janeiro World Championship, right? So it's there, I don't know. I think it was. And
This is about all that, yes.
yeah, 2010, right? Yeah, 14, yeah. Okay. And so this is Miguel Nicoleles, which is a Brazilian neuroscientist, and he works at Fujita University. And basically, it's one of the guys who developed this kind of brain-machine interfaces, specifically applied to paralogia. That's how you say it, paralogia. Paralogic.
Paralysis.
Paralysis. Yeah, maybe.
Pero bueno, es una parálisis.
Yeah, I think it's sort of body. But so what's happening here basically? This was the first like touch in the ball, the official first touch in the ball of the championship, and this person, this individual, cannot walk or move. But by using this this is an exoskeleton, right? And using specific technology in his brain, he was able to shoot the ball, which was like a remarkable thing, I think, for humanity, because I think it's a very scientific, interesting achievement. But of course, there are many philosophical things that we need to consider when we think about that. What are brain-machine interfaces? They basically enable a sort of direct communication between the brain and some external device, which can be an exoskeleton, but it can also be a computer, mouse, or something like that. The idea of these interfaces is basically to sort of translate our neural activity in a specific part of the brain and make or use those neural activity to perform a specific act. For all the brain-machine interfaces, the idea is to capture the electrical and chemical activity of neurons and try to make them work to a specific outside external device that is different from your own body. There are many ways to think about. So this is just like a very specific schematic figure of the kind of things we can do. This actually is so you can use that's what I say in the second part. But there are many methods of brain-machine interfaces. So they are divided usually between non-invasive and invasive. The non-invasive are interesting because they don't have so much consequence in terms of the quality of the signal, for example. But the invasive are more interesting because they can then provide more accurate neural activity. But there is a big debate about how safe this is, and we will discuss this right away. But basically, the most known non-invasive method is to use like a record method in the scalp by using EEG. So you can basically record your neural activity from the outside. You don't need to do any surgical intervention. And this is the positive side of the thing. But of course, because we are using technology that is non-invasive, the signal is not as good. So you cannot do. You cannot create such an efficient brain-machine interface because of that. But this is basically the most current method right now because it's more cheap as well to run. And it's more safe in the sense that it doesn't have an impact or such a strong impact in your brain in general. But then invasive methods are more interesting because you can capture the signals more efficiently, and these are things that you actually need to replicate in order to perform specific act that your own body cannot do. You can implant specific electrodes in your brain. Of course, there are many risks associated with this, especially because of surgery. But actually, so it's because of surgery, but right now we already have some data that shows that a lot of the patients who have invasive electrodes implanted, they have higher tendency to depression. There is a very weird correlation where these patients start to develop a gambling addiction, for example. And why is that the case? Well, if you imagine a brain, right? Imagine that the part of your brain that is responsible for, I don't know, for lowering the tremblance of the Parkinson patient, for example. It's a very specific part of your brain, right? It's very tiny, let's say. But the thing is that the best electrodes we have, they cover way more brain zones that you actually need. So you literally, and the thing is, an electrode is literally a hole in the brain that will stay like that. So if you take off that mechanical tool, that hole will still be empty. So you literally impact the way the neural plasticity in that part is done. So that's why some authors think that we should actually not perform this kind of technology. Why? Because we don't have the technical terms to do it in a safe way. So you cannot just fix, for example, the trembling of a Parkinson's disease. There is always a second consequence, and this is why exactly with the side of the electrode. The best electrode we have, imagine it will be. If you think about the brain, right, it will be like this entire place, and a neuron will be like just this, right? And sometimes you just need to fix like hundreds of thousands of neurons, but the electrode is always bigger than what you need. So in a sense, this technology works because patients with Parkinson, for example, they have an improvement in their quality of life regarding the tremblings, for example. But there are many other mental and psychological consequences that arise from that. But I think this is that this technology is interesting is that you need to combine a bunch of different research areas in order to provide a useful technology. So of course, neuroscience is the basis of this technology because you need to understand how the brain functions and how neurons communicate with each other, and basically use neuroscience to identify the sort of neural signals that you need. But of course, you also need neurophysiology. So you need to use techniques like EEG or EEG to sort of record how the brain works, how your normal brain works, and then to replicate that the patterns of activity that you recorded. You also need, of course, machine learning, right? Because you need to extract the relevant information from the data that you recorded. Of course, you also need to develop neural prosthetics, which basically is how or which kind of tools and objects you can use to replace a biological neuron. And I think one of the biggest technical challenges right now of brain-machine interface is to get the right material, right? Because we are using like silicon-based technology usually, and silicon-based technology doesn't behave nothing like a neuron does, right? It doesn't have the properties needed. So I think one of the technical challenges is actually to come up with a different material in order to make it more similar to how a neuron works. Of course, you also need biomedical engineering, so you need to develop specific hardware and softwares in order to create all this. And of course, you also need all the clinical research side, and of course, some ethics, maybe. I'm joking, I'm being ironic. But so I think brain-machine interfaces are interesting from a philosophical point of view, also because they deal with so many different areas of research. And we sort of need an interdisciplinary method to understand how it works and how we can provide it in a safe manner. So we can think, for example, about the word I was trying to say, paraplegia. How do you say in Spanish? So one of the applications of this technology is with individuals who cannot move any part of their body. You can use those exoskeletons. They are very well, they are not very, they are quite rudimentary if you look at them, right? So they are not very developed, but there is a lot of technology behind them. The idea is basically to recreate a sort of fictional body that your brain will assume is part of your own body, right? So there is a, so we say that the idea of the robotic device is to create a body schema of yourself, right? So your brain needs to recognize that body, that artificial body as you. Because if there is not this recognition, the technology will not work. So the bidirectional communication will not work. And we have, so some of these technologies are, this specification. This technology can provide ways to make people walk again. For example, people who didn't walk for ages, they can walk again. Of course, what does that mean, right? They can walk again. Is it them that are walking, or is a device that is being used? It's like when you are using a wheelchair, right? So is the wheelchair, are you walking with the wheelchair, are you not? So there is this debate about what does this mean, right? So if this is just like an aid, or this is actually you using a technology to recreate your own body. I think that's more a philosophical discussion than an empirical one. But of course, because we are dealing with individuals who cannot move for a lot of years, you need to practice with them. So you can use, for example, virtual reality environments to make them starting to practice a bit about how it feels to use an exoskeleton. And of course, you need to practice all the movement, the balance, the coordination. So you sort of need to make your brain used to having an extended version of your own body. And I think this is very interesting from an ethical point of view, right? Because you can create new possibilities to a lot of people who cannot have those possibilities. And I think this is a positive thing, but again, we need to think about the ethical concerns, right? So, as I told you in the beginning, there is a lot of debate about how safe, like empirically, these technologies are. And this is, so there is a lot of unknown knowledge about this. We are just starting to understand how they work. But one of the things we know is that there is this reversibility problem where basically after a patient uses a electrode or an exoskeleton, it's really hard for him to stop using it. He sort of needs to be attached with that technology for the rest of his life, or the technology will lose its efficiency. So there are many questions that we need to understand. And of course, since there are a lot of things we don't know about this, it's hard to, for example, to guarantee an informed consent in a patient that wants to try this technology, because philosophically this doesn't make any sense, right? Because he cannot be, he cannot know all the information well, because even the doctors and the engineers cannot provide such a thing. So there is this ethical problem that we need to try to understand. Of course, there are also many other problems regarding the data, the neural data of patients, right? We need to literally record and use that. We need to secure that all this data is anonymized, is stored, and it can only be used by the relevant people that were authorized by the patients, etc. And I think this is interesting because some people say that brain-machine interface can fix some of the abilities, but it can also. So imagine you have a specific body that can only move like this, right? Arm, in this case. So some people argue that you are restricting the autonomy of a patient if the movement of the device is already more stricter than like a normal arm, right? So some people think that we should only develop or only use this kind of technology once you can recreate an entire body that can move as a human body. Of course, the paradox here is that you can only achieve such an accomplishment if you start with low, more simple technological devices. So I mean, a lot of questions that we need to consider ethically. But again, and of course, there is always this question regarding the access, right? So who should have access to this kind of technology? Usually, or at least right now, we are doing it with some theoretical assumption, but of course this might be used for other purpose. Imagine that you want to have a better memory, so you don't have to use notes, for example. Imagine you want to learn more in less time. All this technology technically can provide ways to make that happen, and we need to think about how the access of that will happen. But and again, to finish my second part of the talk, I think we need to consider all these ethical issues before the technology is fully developed, and we also need to try to convince, well, doctors, engineers, and politicians as well, probably more politicians, right, that ethics should be part of every step of this development, which is sort of, so currently it is, but I don't think it is. So currently I think we have a lot of ethics involved in AI, but it's just what I call pseudo ethics, right? It's just like a bunch of technical, regulative speculations about the ethics of the technology, but I don't think that's what ethics is when you want to do ethics of technology. You eventually want to analyze the normative side of the things. You don't want to just see if that project correlates with a bunch of regulations that the university or the scientific commission has. And yeah, we can debate a bit more about this if you want, but these are some of my AI projects. So this book, you will be able to find it in the library soon, right? Here, over here, the book, we can stay here.
Yes, of course.
So you will find it.
That's here.
The commentary is on YouTube for free if you want, and this is the new book that I told someone about. Which you can find it online on my website, and that's it. And this is some of the references that I used for both talks. Thank you.
Probably we have many questions from Ramiro.
Yeah, concerning the first part, I don't quite get the epistemic problem. I mean, I get it, but I don't see that it is a distinctive problem. Yeah, or a problem, actually. I agree that solution 3 is what we want. But what you cited the FAIR 25 precedent, which was the black box. It was just a detectable software error and the inexistence of a hardware failsafe. So two perfectly humanly understandable systems. But there was a problem of epistemic, of trust in the machine, but there was no black box component there.
Yeah.
And on the AI side, it is true that you cannot comprehend the calculations that are not humanly comprehensible. But somehow someone established as facts that AIs are better for certain tasks than humans.
Right.
So, I mean, a doctor doesn't have to know how an MRI machine works. You trust it.
Right. Yeah.
You must trust the experts, the quantum physicists that say, well, this resonates nuclei and such.
Yeah.
And here you can trust the computer scientists, or I don't know who made those studies that says, well, it is actually plausible that AI is more efficient. So you have some kind of epistemic assurance that you are doing the right thing, in deferring to the AI. And the real moment we control the code. Because we can trust based on governmental experience. You have some kind of epistemic warrant that works.
Right.
Which is not different from the epistemic warrant you have when you say, when you defer to physicists in trusting MRI machines.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I actually, I think I have a reasonable answer to it. We'll see. So I'm working now on this distinction that I don't think it exists in the literature, which is what I call an easy trust gap versus a hard trust gap. And I think the kind of examples you offered, or the kind of what we can say is that human traditional medicine, for example, I think it falls under the easy trust gap. Why? Because, yeah, the doctor doesn't know anything or everything about even its own specialty or the general knowledge of medicine or how an electronic machine knows or works. But there is a thing which I call epistemic potentiality, which is related with, he doesn't know, but if he wants, he has the potential to know about it, like in terms of epistemic like outcome. So yeah, he doesn't know how a fMRI machine works, but he can go to a fMRI expert and he can, discuss and exchange information that he can comprehend, and he can retrieve explanations from that. I think the case with AI medicine, at least the ones that have a black box solver by definition, I think that you lose this potential, epistemic potentiality. So you will not be able, anything you can discuss with anyone in the world, which breathing mind in the world, that you will not be able to retrieve any information from that. So I think this distinction between an easy trust gap and hard trust gap sort of solve that. But yeah, maybe you will disagree. Hopefully you will not be the reviewer of my thing. Yeah, but to be honest, does that make sense? So my point is that, yeah, in human, and we have that feeling when we go to a doctor sometimes, right? We don't understand everything that the doctor is saying to us. But if we want, we can ask him and he can try to explain to us, and we can sort of create a more informed decision about our own medical situations. But I don't know if you are convinced, maybe you're not, right?
To a certain extent, I will be brief. Yes, it won't be the kind of reasons you are used to get, but you can talk to a statistician or someone that understands those papers, and he will explain or she will explain to you that, yes, well, according to these metrics, you can actually show that AI is more efficient than humans. So you can have some kind of indirect world, if you want to call it that.
You're talking about the black box?
Sorry?
Yeah, you're talking about the black box?
Yeah. So you can have like another kind of world that whatever processes are happening inside there work better than what happens inside here.
Right, and that's where the ethical paradox arises.
Yeah, but I mean, you can have the epistemic world that it works that way. It works better than.
Which way?
No, it works. It performs better than a human.
Yes, that we know.
Yeah. So I mean,
but the point
down to a certain extent, that's an epistemic reliance you have.
Reliance, yeah.
You can rely on people having done science in the correct way, statisticians or something like that, and you can trust that AI will outperform you in certain areas.
Right.
So I don't. That to me somehow can solve the potential trust issue.
Right. But so you don't agree that there is a relationship between trust and epistemic? Like you think that they can be separated? Like even if you don't have full knowledge of system, if you know like how it works in general, this will be enough to rely on it. I think like for developing cars and airplanes, maybe that works, but in medicine, we usually have more ethical standards, right? Why? Because usually we are dealing with people who are in a very, very fragile state. And this demands from our society like a way to deal with them. But yeah, we sort of need to have like, we need to fully understand what we are trying to do with patients, right? It's not like we are just doing a car and it's not that relevant. And this is especially relevant when something wrong happens, right? In medicine, you learn more with what you do wrong than with what you do right. But I think when we are using a black box and we have a wrong diagnosis, for example, the thing is that you cannot understand why the diagnosis is wrong. And while in traditional medicine, you can sort of understand it, right? You can sort of find why you did wrong, right? But I think with black box medicine, you cannot achieve that. And this is another thing that I think we need to consider because, as I said, the history of medicine is the history of really bad errors, but that brought us knowledge that was relevant to develop a lot of therapeutic measures and etc.
I have a comment. Perhaps this is sort of a challenge, but I don't mean in a personal way. Just the fact that you mentioned that embracing these sort of projects might lower the economic costs of the whole population and whatnot, and then also that it might benefit those disadvantaged or whatnot.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that at this point there are some people raising concerns about that. Right. So first on the collection of data and classifications and whatnot, this has a lot of environmental costs. Mm-hmm. Right, the electricity, the water that we need to pour into these systems to perform correctly, it really might outweigh the economic gains that we have from that. So that on one side. From the other side, on benefiting those that are, less benefited by society as it stands. It also has been discussed that this actually, augments exploitation in some cases because, people, for example, labeling a lot of staff are paid like absolutely nothing on the hour. So, and they are also in, third world countries. And so really this actually makes greater the sort of charge that the system puts on them before embracing the medicine of AI thing. So it's just a comment, perhaps you have thought about that.
No, those are very interesting shows, but I think they are like not directly relevant for the project itself. So they are more concerned about the sociological impact, maybe. But they are very relevant for sure, yeah. So I think all these positive outcomes from the AI medicine can be discussed, like even the efficiency parts. What efficiency means, right? So because like a medical doctor, he has a full understanding of how a human body works. But these AI models, they are very specific. That's why they perform well, because they are so specific and they are just good for one specific diagnosis, for example. And you cannot replicate that model to a very similar but different, diagnosis, for example. So tumor cancer models, for example, cannot be applied to skin cancer detection. You need a completely new model for that. So are they efficient? I don't know. Even the way we are talking about efficiency can be problematic from a philosophical point of view. And for sure, like the economical output as well is very. I think it's the one that is more debatable for sure. Because some people say that this will save like humanity because it will make health very cheap for everyone. But we need to think about the consequences of that as well, right? So how this will technically or economically really bring an advantage to everyone. Because usually when technology is developed, it's not like everyone that can benefit from it, right? There is a very strict line of how the technology impacts the life of different people. And we know that usually it's white people who can get more access to it, can benefit more, and this creates even a more unequal balance between those who cannot have access to it. So for sure, these are very important questions, but first, I don't think I have the expertise sort of to think about them. And also, I think they are similar, but they have a philosophical different, like the nature of those questions are philosophically different from the ones I'm trying to address. But for sure, they are absolutely relevant. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for the very interesting talk. I have a couple of comments. One has to do with Ramiro's worry. I think there's a difference on your behalf between what happens when you use fMRIs and EEGs and all that stuff, and what happens with medical AI. And it seems to me that all those machines are not doing the fMRIs, etc., are not doing any kind of abductive reasoning. They are not trying to tell you what is going on. They are reporting certain input. Whereas the medical AI, at least the diagnosis one, is trying to take the data and then give an explanation of that. So I received these results. This is what you have. And that's a very different form of information processing.
Yeah.
I think that difference is one of the differences that generates the epistemic problem. You take the fMRI, it's just taking input from the brain and it's giving you an image.
Right.
It's not telling you whether you have a tumor or anything like that. It's up to you, doctor, to understand how the image works and to offer an explanation of what is going on with the patient.
Right.
That's what the AI is doing. What the doctor usually does with the fMRI.
I'm not sure that's what
The one that gives you a diagnosis, you give it data and you give a diagnosis, right?
but the diagnosis is not an explanation. Explanation is
The diagnosis is definitely an explanation of the data, of course, why not? I mean, I take the data of what's wrong with this patient and I'm telling you, the explanation of you feeling like this is that you have this sickness.
well,
I'm not telling, the doctor is not gonna tell me why that's what's going on, but I mean, that's definitely, and that brings me to my second common question, which is that you seem to think with the third solution that the problem is mainly a matter of access. That if we were to know what the AI is thinking, there would be no problem. And I think that has a very controversial presupposition, which is that it might be that what the AI is thinking does not offer the kind of explanation that we want. It might be that it's just randomized use of data, and it just bling, you have cancer. And if you find out how the AI found that out, you're going to still think like, that's not what I needed. So it's not just access, it's just not the kind of thing that we're looking for when we are looking for a medical solution for problems, right? Even if we solve the Edson's third AI problem of recursive AIs, it might be that what we're getting is like, okay, so now you know. And you're like, okay, interesting.
it's not a sufficient condition, but it's a necessary condition.
No, what I'm saying, what I'm suggesting is that there's an even further problem there. Just gaining access is not the same as getting what we need.
Right. Okay, I'm sorry if I assume that, but I think it's just a necessary condition. But you also need other stuff, which you can find in the way human traditional medicine works.
Sure,
But that's a good point, because a lot of the times when we are thinking about these issues, we commit this kind of, there is an economist who called this fallacy, a nirvana fallacy thing. What is a nirvana fallacy thing? Like, fallacy is it's when you assume or when you demand from an AI system that it performs and gives more explanation than the counterpart. So every time you are so my point is, maybe you are doing this kind of fallacies when we talk about this, because we are demanding too much from this AI medical system that we don't demand to human traditional medicine. And this raises the question of how ethical is human medicine right now doing, right? So are we having medical medicine right now without the AI medicine initiatives being applied to the medical practice? So, yeah, but I don't agree with the point of the explanation. So I think there are different surveys when you use explanation, right? So of course, when a model is classifying something, right? He tells him, for example, okay, you have cancer, or this is a cancer, or this is based on the previous knowledge that was part of the system. This looks like, from an inductive point of view, this looks like the same, right?
Yeah.
And it was interesting to assume that you think that human medicine is adaptive by definition. I'm not sure if that's the case as well. There is a lot of debate about what doctors do, right?
I'm not saying it is by definition. I'm saying it's one of the things that doctors do. They involve in abductive inferences.
And you think AI models will never be able to do that?
I'm saying it does. And that's the difference between AI and an fMRI. The fMRI is not in the business of doing abductive inferences. It's in the business of taking a picture of your brain.
Right.
And that's not the same kind of information processing.
Yeah.
That's meant to be on behalf of your point that there is a problem with AI that
But you think
we don't have with
it's not just the answers, it's an underlying problem. Yeah. How would you call it?
I have no idea. This is the first time I thought about this being a problem.
Yeah, I think you're right. But I think that law can be applied to both human and AI.
Maybe.
Yeah. So it's not a new problem in the sense that it didn't exist before and it was created by the AI. Yeah, I think so.
You know more. I trust you.
No, don't. Yeah.
Okay. Next one.
Yeah.
David.
Just two little things. One is a follow-up of Ramiro's comment, which is that it's about the impact on trust of the whole new technologies. And it seems to me that trust doesn't involve asking for scientific explanations on the part of the doctor. It's a more complex relationship. And so maybe it's perfectly compatible with accepting deference. So the patient himself defers to the doctor, and the doctor is supposed to defer to any other kind of other expert. So I think that the impact on trust is more complex in a way, and it depends on I don't know, a relationship that it's not based on getting knowledge and explanations. And the other thing that I was worried is whether these technologies, I'm not clear about it because I don't know anything about it, but it depends on the case, right? Because in some cases it's just an instrument and the doctor's decision depends on many other tools, and so he has or she has to double check the results of not just the application of one of these technologies, but so that I don't know how much it impacts or what's the role, what role it is supposed to have in getting a decision, a medical decision. It depends on the case, I guess.
Yeah. All this trying to be the comment that you can begin, right?
But maybe you present things as being black and white, and so maybe each case.
But I think
has more
I sort
nuances.
of addressed that when I told you I did that brief comment in the beginning. You remember when I said that different technologies will have different ways. There were many ways to relate human and technology. So yeah, of course, if you use an AI system, just an AI system to your own epistemic, performance, I don't think we have a lot of problems there. Or the problems we have are the problems that we have in normal medicine. But again, the point I'm trying to make is how we can think in a system that is fully autonomous in the decision. Like, that was the main philosophical case that I want to try to address here. But I agree that the different technologies will require different solutions because they are different by nature. So your first comment was interesting because there is also a lot of discussion about what trust means, right? And I will also need to provide a theory of trust. At first, there is this distinction between trust and reliance, right? So you rely on your car, you rely on your coffee machine. The thing is, are doctors relying on these tools, or do they actually need to trust? Do they need to have this extra condition? Yeah, I don't know. From now, I don't have like a theory of trust to tell you, to give you, but it's a very important part of the project for sure. I will need to provide first a theory of trust and then apply it to medicine in the traditional way and in the AI way, and then see if. But I think that the intuition, or at least one of the conditions of trust for me, is the epistemic information. And maybe you will disagree, right? Because you think they are independent of each other. I think there is a dependence all the time. Yeah.
Seems to be one element, but.
One element, yes. Yeah. But I don't think we can think about trust without considering the epistemic side as well. But this is controversial because some people actually think that they are completely independent. So, yeah, all words.
We have a question, Eduardo Rivera Lopez. The other side of the strong connection.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. I enjoy your talk, especially the first part. And my question is also about the first part of the talk. And my comment is also related with some of the previous comments, I think. But I will try to make the point more radical in a way. Because it seems to me that the tension is between the value of efficiency, but at the cost of transparency, and on the other side, autonomy of the patient, which require transparency. But why not take autonomy more seriously and give the patient the opportunity to choose between transparency and explanation and so on, and more efficiency. So the patient could choose between a standard medicine in which the doctor can explain everything and so on, or a medicine in which maybe many things are not transparent, are opaque, and so on. But he or she could have more efficient diagnosis or treatments. And maybe that, I'm not sure that would be in practical terms viable, because that depends on many practical things, but in a way that could be an alternative, I think.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, because actually you can argue for that. You can say, okay, we will never be able to have a 100% understanding of how AI medicine works, but we can leave that to every individual. So, and we sort of have that already in human traditional medicine, right? So if you don't like the diagnosis of a doctor, you are free to go to get a second opinion, for example. So this will be the same, more or less the same. So I don't know, imagine that like the government has like 2 ways of guarantee medicine to its citizens, and you can choose, okay, I want to go to the AI medical thing. But the point is, you are aware of the dangers of that, right? So you know you'll probably be diagnosed in 10 minutes, and you know that you probably have a faster or a more efficient diagnosis, but this will come with the outcome that maybe the doctor will not be able to explain to you why you need to take that pill.
Exactly, exactly.
But you take the pill because of the ad hoc explanations that you already have about that system. So yeah, that will be well. I don't think this is like a philosophical, answer to the problem, but it's at least a practical, pragmatic way to deal with this ethical problem, right? So, but sometimes we ask too much for too many things, right? We philosophers, we are always demanding theories and very sound and profound theories about everything. But maybe the pragmatic turn is also.
I think sometimes we take a conception of autonomy which is in a way too paternalistic. The patient should be explained and should have all the information, and sometimes the patient doesn't want to have all the information. So and this is also an expression of his or her autonomy.
Yes, and
not to know.
But yeah, it's an expression of its own epistemic value, right? So he chooses to not know, right? So, but that's different from not being informed because we don't know, right? There is a big difference there. So yeah, well, I think it's a pragmatic solution. I'm not sure we can say it's the right one in terms of the ethics of it. But it can be one of the solutions for sure, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I have one comment and one question. The comment is a follow-up from what Damian said, and it concerns the idea of efficiency, and not because of the experimental cost and all that, but because of the lack of social connection that follows from adopting that kind of out of the loop technologies, in the sense that I think that probably part of what makes medicine work as well as it does is the human caring in the process. You have someone who is caring for you and is concerned and knows you and is with you in all the moments that you need someone to be there for you. For example, I think more in the terms of nurses in a hospital and all that. No, you have someone there who is a human being like you, who understands your suffering, and not a robotic nurse that maybe is very efficient, giving you the pill at the right time. But I think that kind of human connection or social connection is also part of what makes medicine work. So in that sense, my concern is the lack of that part of what efficiency means.
Right.
No, that is a comment, but maybe you want to say something, I don't know.
Can I say it now? Or?
Yeah, as you like.
Yeah, that's very interesting because we have data that shows that. But I don't know if it's a paradox or not, but some of these philosophers who argue in favor of AI medicine, they actually argue that AI medicine will create a medicine that is more about care than right now. Why? Because right now, the health experts, they are very busy taking care of a bunch of things that they should not be doing. And the idea is that if you use AI medicine, they will have more free time to spend on the caring side or the sociological part of medicine.
But what the AI you need for that is another kind of thing, not a robotic nurse.
No, I'm saying like you still have the human nurse, right? But she will have more time to be able to care because a lot of her job was replaced by an AI in medicine. So it's interesting to think about that, right? That how this counterintuitive seems to be, but AI medicine can also actually improve how people feel about going to hospital, for example. And this can have more,
But what we see in reality is that never happens.
Right.
Absolutely never happens. So companies look at that as an opportunity to lower the costs, and then they fire the
But that's where like ethics can have a role, right? On which governments to
Okay,
Sorry.
no, I mean, maybe the part of the issue is one more time, where we can use and why, what kind of engines,
Yeah.
and where you cannot, or you should not.
Mhm.
No, but the other question is about the second part,
Right.
about the brain, the machine interfaces, because also I saw that kind of news about exoskeletons and all that, and the connection between those kind of chips or whatever in the brain and our legs or a robotic hand or whatever. But you also said about some machines improving our memory or that or our knowledge or whatever. So I would like to know if there really are now, or it is here some kind of technology where, because all the things that are working connects our sensory somatic cortex with our legs or hands or muscles.
So you want to know about the cognitive?
Yes, about the cognitive improvement. Is there any advance about that or not? It's always talk about connecting our brain to the internet, for example. So in fact, what is improving is the information we can have and the velocity of the information or is there anything else about cognitive improvement in that?
Well, that I know of, like, so first thing, we sort of already have that kind of things, right? So when we write books, when we use computers, we are sort of extending our
but you don't have a chip in your brain.
But it's not internal, right? The point is internal, yeah. We don't have the thing is like the main motivation for brain-machine interface is always to report input, right? So it's, for example, to create. So the first tools were actually to create ways, specific tools for the movement of the eyes to be able to move a cursor in a computer, so that person could like interact, could communicate with the nurse, for example, something like that. And what we are facing is always therapeutic applications, especially because these kind of functions are very expensive. And the only way to get fancy is to show that they have a practical thing. But I think the future is should consider this cognitive enhancement. I know a work from a colleague actually in Portugal, which is called Miguel Paes Vieira, and he actually worked with Nicola Elish. And what he does right now is he can basically implement 3 lectures in 3 different threads. So we just have works with animals right now. We call it ratinhos in Portuguese. How do you call it rats? The ones you use in scientific research. It's rats, not mice. And so what he does is he basically connects the 3 lectures. And the 3 rats needs to think the same thing in order to achieve one specific goal. So if he calls this like mental connection, but basically, so we have 3 rats, and if they want to eat, they have to, I don't know, think about pushing a button, for example. And the only way the food will be delivered to the rats is if the 3 of them are thinking at the same time about the same function. And this will have a lot of applications to humans in general and for the cognitive part as well. So we'll be able to create also a technology. But this is very, so right now we are not running technology. We are working on rats for now, and but of course the idea will then to be applied to apply that to humans. But again, there is this technical challenge because so rats they have a small brain first. And you can smash the brain that you don't have any ethical concerns with it, even if I'm against that. But you can do that right now. We cannot do that with humans, with the brain of a human. And right now it would be very unethical to try even such a thing, right? Because again, we have the main problem is a problem of size. We don't have the right to right now to to implement like in specific and without further secondary consequences, this kind of technology in the sector.
So there is a technological limitation right now.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
And
Okay.
we need a different kind of material.
Okay.
Yeah. Or maybe we will not be able to reach that.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I don't know if there are any other questions or we have none.
Is it Q&A? Is it?
Right. Thank you very much for that.